Alright, I am back with what will probably be my first and only ever Google Stadia video, which is existing as something of a eulogy because Google has just killed Stadia, which is big ol' shocked Pikachu face reaction there. Um, it has been a really weird couple of years with Google Stadia here, and I kind of wanted to just go through what's happening now, where things have been. I was one of the first people to test Google Stadia among a bunch of other tech journalists. My experience with Stadia was very weird and bad initially. For some reason, I was trying to use it in my house, and it was so laggy, and the latency was so bad, it was borderline unplayable. And I know a few different people had this. Gene Park from the Washington Post has a very now famous GIF of him hitting the space bar while playing Destiny, and then like doing this, and then watching the thing jump like a full second later. And latency was always the biggest problem with cloud gaming, so everyone was like, I don't know. I was engaged in a lengthy back and forth with Google where they were like desperately trying to fix my issue. Ultimately, they thought it had something to do with my mesh internet network in my house, and it was just reacting with Stadia in a very weird way. Eventually, I did get to a place where Stadia was working as it was supposed to, and it was genuinely impressive. Even if I think cloud gaming is still not really a primary means of gaming in a lot of instances, I have a hard time arguing that I have ever experienced a better cloud experience than Google Stadia, which for what it is, I think it does what it does very well. But immediately you could see the problem was that the use cases for Google Stadia were so narrow with the way it was in its current form. So for me personally, I don't travel that much, so I'm not needing to play in hotels or on the go very often. So like if I'm home, what reason do I have to play Google Stadia over my consoles or over my PC? And there wasn't one. And you would argue, well, okay, Google Stadia is for getting more people into gaming. Because you don't have to buy expensive console hardware. Sure, except the only people that were really getting into Stadia were like early tech adopter people who really have all that tech in the first place. And the model of Google Stadia was the other primary problem, where it wasn't just, sign up and you have this library of games to access. It was sign up and you have to buy a library of games, like it was Steam or something. So it was, at least in its early stages, it was just selling everything separately. So if you wanted a game on Stadia, it wasn't just like, I can take this game I've been playing on Xbox or PlayStation or PC, and then I'm going to hop on Stadia and play it there. Like, you would have to rebuy the game on Stadia. And eventually they did add some, free games to Stadia, and there was Stadia Pro, which came with a lot of games through subscription, but fundamentally, like, everyone wanted it to function like Netflix or Xbox Game Pass, where you pay a fee, a subscription fee, and you have access to a pretty wide range of games you can just pick up and play whenever. Charging everyone, $60 for each game you pick up on Stadia and then build up this library of games was not terribly appealing. And one other core problem here, in addition to kind of just the general hesitancy of most people to kind of lean hard onto cloud streaming, was that Stadia wasn't really offering anything unique in terms of its library. Originally, Google was planning to make a bunch of first-party games, and they hired Jade Raymond to lead their first-party game efforts, and they were working on some things, and we know that some people were working on Stadia exclusive games, and I think a couple smaller Stadia exclusives did come out at one point, but they never had anything to directly compete with Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo. They would offer many of the same third-party games on those platforms, and so it was an alternative for a lot of big titles that did eventually come to Stadia. But over time, fewer and fewer titles came there. And the titles that did come there, it was like, Stadia was never a priority. So for something like Outriders, I remember it would take months for the Outriders team to get the game patched up currently on Stadia. Where so people on Stadia would be playing on these desperately old versions. And one of the primary touted benefits of Stadia was there's no downloads, there's no patches, there's no nothing, so it's going to be so easy. But these developers were falling behind in Stadia support because it just wasn't a big priority. And over time, you could just see this all collapsing. And you could kind of see this from moment one, because it just, I never understood who Google Stadia was for past like a very niche crowd. And every time I wrote anything critical about it, there was like a couple of dozen really, really diehard, super intense, uncomfortably intense Stadia people who were like harassing me and like in my mentions, and like I don't know where they are now. A lot of them are gone or have gone private or blocked me or whatever. But like outside of a very select crowd and very select use cases, there was not a widespread adoption of Stadia or a widespread case for it. I'm not saying, no one ever had fun playing on Stadia. That's not true. Certainly some people enjoyed it, but not, this is Google we're talking about. They want to become a major player in the space, and that was not happening for them and not happening fast enough. They apparently figured out how expensive and hard game development is, so they killed their first party studio. And then but since then, they have just routinely been saying, like, we're not killing Stadia, we're not killing Stadia. 2 months ago, they were saying how they were not going to shut down Stadia. And here we are today, and how this has unfolded is so bizarre, so bizarre. Okay, so first it sounded like they were handling this pretty well, where they announced it was closing down, and everyone's like, okay, I have an entire library of games I purchased on Stadia that are literally inaccessible because the service is going away, which is always the risk that you're running with something that's a cloud-based based platform. Unlike, Xbox, you still have, games on Xbox that go to Game Pass or go to xCloud, and like it's still a whole ecosystem. But if Stadia shuts down, you lose your library, and that hardware you bought functionally does nothing. So they're refunding every purchase ever made on Stadia. That's insane. Like, it's Google, so like it's not really, gonna break their bank or anything. Like, Stadia wasn't that big of a hit, so I don't know if it's, all that much in the grand scheme of, Google's fortunes here, but it's crazy, like, that they have to do that, and that's really the only way they could rectify the situation without maybe facing some sort of class action lawsuit or something. So that's every game purchase, every hardware purchase, even purchases you made within games through Stadia. So I think that's like microtransactions and like DLC and stuff. The only thing they're not refunding are Pro memberships, which gave you monthly access to Stadia Pro. But that is crazy. But it's good they're refunding everybody. The problem is on the developer side of this, both at Google and with third parties, nobody knew about this until like the day it happened. This includes Google's own engineers working on Stadia, where apparently they were just summoned to like we have a meeting to, discuss Stadia. And they went to this meeting and they're like, we're shutting Stadia down. And I've seen at least a couple developers being like, I was working on this new feature for 6 months and now it's in the trash and pointless. And like the Stadia team itself didn't know this was coming. And by proxy, no developer on Stadia making games for Stadia apparently knew this was coming either. So you have a lot of smaller developers, like a lot of smaller indie studios saying like, I was spending the resources to release this upcoming game on Stadia. Some are like, this game is supposed to come out in 2 days. Others are like, it comes out in a month at like November 1st, but now it's not coming anymore. I don't think these games are like exclusive to Stadia, but if you're a small studio, it takes time and money and energy to port your game to another platform like Stadia, to spend that time to work on it. And some of these studios apparently were, contracted by Google, where Google was going to pay them money to make their game available on Stadia, and now they're wondering if they're going to get paid. On the larger side, you have a company like Ubisoft that loves diving into every new platform head first, and they have done a lot with a huge amount of support for a bunch of games on Stadia. And they're just like, yeah, we don't know. We're going to let you know what happens to all our Stadia games, because if they did get a heads up, which I don't think they did not prepare anything for this moment. And then you have a place like Bungie where, so there are Stadia players on Bungie, which raises some questions like, what if you made a Guardian and you only play on Stadia? Like, does that Guardian auto transfer to another platform, even if you haven't made an account there? Like, what's going to happen with that? But more importantly, internally, Bungie has been using Stadia. It says hundreds of its developers use Stadia daily with their new work from home system as a way to kind of test, I think, at least live versions of the game, some versions of the game. They do a lot of testing and playing on Stadia because of its ease of access for remote stuff. And there was even a rumor a long time ago that Bungie was trying to buy Stadia tech from Google because they had apparently, liked just how much this had helped them, the system had helped them. And then I think that's didn't happen, and then the Sony deal happened. But I have no idea what happens there. Google makes some mention of like, oh, we're gonna invest this tech in new ways and work with partners, and so like maybe they'll figure out a way to like let Bungie use the tech still to work on the game, but like it's very nebulous. And Bungie posted a statement immediately like, yeah, we just heard about this, we don't know what's going on, we're gonna get back to you. And so apparently there's just meetings happening like all over the place about what happens to Stadia support now, both at Bungie and all these other places. And I get Google probably wanted to keep this from leaking, even though it has already been rumored many times in the past that they're shutting Stadia down. But they didn't tell anybody. They didn't tell their own engineers. They didn't tell developers. And the only kind of gold star they get is refunding everybody's money. But on the development side, this is kind of a nightmare. And I think Google is not really cultivating its reputation well here. Granted, like at a certain point, you're such a big company, like does it even matter what you do ever to change anyone's opinion of you? But like, the Google graveyard is a pretty famous slate of things where they try some new product or service and then they kill it after 2 years or whatever if it's not some massive success. Stadia is probably one of the biggest projects in that graveyard, I would argue, and one that kind of breaks a ton of relationships with the entire gaming industry and all these developers that they worked with, because they talked it up so much in the beginning and how it was so important to them and how they were invested in it for the long haul. And here we are, like 3 years, 4 years later, and it's dead, and it literally is ceasing to exist. And for a cloud-based service, that comes with a lot of complications. The tech, again, is very good, and I would love to see how Stadia tech could be used to improve generalized cloud gaming in the future, but we are still not in a cloud gaming era. Cloud gaming is good as an asset, like when you can do Xbox, cloud streaming or whatever they call it now, where you have your existing games that you already own on like all these different platforms, and then you're like, okay, I want to play this game on the cloud. You can do that. Or Sony has like a lot of, I think they're PS4 games, I don't know, PS3 games, PS4 games on the cloud. You can access those there. And so like cloud gaming has its uses. It is still, again, if you have an alternative, I don't think you're going to choose cloud gaming over a console or a PC or a piece of hardware that is, live running a game. Because even if it's 99% good, that 1% can be very annoying in games when you have, such tiny reaction windows and things like that. And Stadia had its like fun uses in places like Destiny, where like the trials pool was so small on Stadia Destiny that like you would just run into the same folks. It was kind of this little community. There was the Witch Queen farm where if you you would just like run a chess loop, and because of the way licensing worked, if you were playing on Stadia, which you probably didn't own the Witch Queen on Stadia, you would be getting world drops, and that was a way to farm crafting patterns or something. So like, this is what I mean, is like it was always just such a niche thing that never expanded and really only contracted in time. And the world is not ready for a pure cloud gaming service. The US internet is not ready to support that. Cloud gaming just has to be kind of its own thing that supports other stuff. And it's hard to even, like, besides Xbox Cloud Gaming, there is Amazon Luna, which most people don't even know exists or has never even heard of it, which is Amazon's cloud gaming thing, which is kind of mostly just a side promo for Amazon Prime, because Prime will get you access to some games you can stream through Luna. But like, I literally didn't even know it was out until like a couple months ago. I thought it was something that was still in development or something that they were planning. But as you can see, like, cloud gaming is still just a very small piece of gaming, where if Google really wanted to break into the market, they were going to have to do a lot more than that. And so now Google's, the entirety of Google's contribution to gaming now is essentially the Google Play Store. And that is nothing. That is just you being a storefront. And they have clearly no interest in developing their own games, and they are well behind a lot of their, giant tech competition. Microsoft has been in this for 20 years. Amazon is at least making gaming adjacent purchases and moves. Amazon owns Twitch. Amazon is Luna. Amazon is still developing games to varying degrees of success. But they're at least, they didn't shut down all their efforts like Google before they even made anything. So it's a very weird spot for Google to be in, and I understand why nobody really trusts Google given things like this. And like why when they launch the next thing, why am I going to believe anything they say about that when they were either lying about Stadia this whole time and like how it was doing and their plans for it, or they were just not recognizing their own writing on the wall based on how the market didn't really want Stadia, how the model wasn't good, like all of these things, and they were just blissfully ignorant of that. So like neither of those are good answers. But I feel for all the people who worked on Stadia who were kind of just shafted by this announcement and never really got the support and leadership they deserved, and then the developers who wasted a bunch of time and money developing for this. I hope they can get that sorted out, and I hope everybody gets paid. So anyway, that was Stadia. It wasn't great. It had its uses, but the tech needs to be applied to other things that are not a dedicated cloud streaming service from Google, because that was not the correct use of it. Time will tell if cloud gaming becomes the mainstream thing. In I can't predict what's going to happen in 10, 20 years from now, but for now we are not there, and Stadia was not the path to get there. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.